Today's topic is capitalism and the First Amendment. And unfortunately, capitalism has gotten a really bad rap, particularly among people of our generation. I'm barely still of your generation. All right, so I'm going to hold on to that signifier as long as I possibly can. Too many young Americans don't know anything about capitalism. They don't know why it's good. They think socialism is good. There's a Harvard Institute of Politics poll in spring 2016, and it found that Bernie Sanders, that loon bag, was the only major candidate with a net positive rating among 18 to 29-year-olds. 54% viewed him favorably, compared with just 31% who viewed him unfavorably. And now they're making the argument we should lower the voting age to 16. I can't see how that goes wrong. The same poll showed that only 42% of young Americans supported capitalism. 33% said they supported socialism, as in full-scale socialism. Like 1 in 3 young Americans supports full-scale socialism. Fully 50% of all Democratic voters said they favored socialism over capitalism. 1 in 2. That's probably because young people are too young to remember when socialist nations like the USSR actually threatened nuclear destruction, when they murdered tens of millions of people. I mean, there still are some there's still some Soviet-style dictatorships, right? The communist Chinese are still imprisoning millions and billions of people under repressive, harsh rule. North Korea, obviously, is still a communist paradise where people are shipped off to gulags. But the idea of socialism has become very popular among young people. And the reason that it's become popular among young people is because they've been told that it is moral. Not that it works, not that it's great, but that it's moral. It's fair. And we all like things that are fair. If we're in a room and somebody has more money and somebody has less money, wouldn't it be more fair if we just pooled the money and then we split it up evenly among the participants? Just like the cookies in kindergarten. Except, of course, that's not the way the world works, and that's not actually moral. Because in a free country, wealth and the capacity to gain it is largely contingent on the decisions that you make. It doesn't just fall upon you. Most wealth in the United States is not inherited. Most wealth in the United States is created over the course of lifetimes by people who engage in economic activity and commerce. Capitalism is good because capitalism is freedom. Socialism is bad because socialism is tyranny. Not it's an aspect of tyranny. Socialism itself is tyranny. The statement of socialism is that your labor is owed to the society. The notion of socialism is that you do not own your own freedom. You do not own your own time. You do not own your own labor. You do not own your own work. You do not own the products of your own work. The basic notion of capitalism is you own all of those things, and now you have to engage in free exchange with someone else who does not owe you anything. If you want to thrive, if you want to succeed, you are going to have to make something somebody else wants. People think capitalism is selfishness. No, socialism is selfishness. The notion that I have to somehow supply you the money so you can sit in your basement and paint with watercolors. Socialism, the idea that I'm supposed to fulfill all your dreams by paying you for something I don't want and have no need for. But capitalism is precisely the opposite. We all do stuff in our daily jobs that we don't like. Why? Because there's a group for it who want to consume it. How many people love their daily job every day? I'm lucky. I get to go to a job that I really enjoy every day. But a lot of people don't. And you know why they do it? They do it because they understand that in a free society, they're going to have to produce something that is not entertaining and interesting only to them. If my podcast had 1 listener, I would have to quit podcasting. And if whatever business you go into has no customers, your business will go out of business. As I'm fond of saying, capitalism is forced altruism. It forces you to do something that somebody else wants if you want to live. Socialism is forced altruism in a different way. It's forcing your altruism to me. Right? So capitalism is about I have to be forced to do something good for you in order for me to live. And socialism is about the idea that I have to be forced to do something for you so that you can live. That's not the same thing at all. Capitalism also happens to be the most efficient system for the distribution of wealth in the history of mankind. It is the greatest it is the greatest engine for growth in the history of mankind. It is the single greatest force for the empowerment of individual human beings in the history of mankind. So, why is it unpopular after all this is said? It's unpopular because it's very easy to demagogue capitalism. Any policy that has diffuse costs and concentrated benefits is a popular policy by nature. Right? Any policy that has diffuse costs and concentrated benefits is going to be popular. So subsidies, for example, to farmers in Iowa, those are popular because farmers in Iowa get a big chunk of cash, and you only lost 1 cent off your paycheck, so you didn't even see it, you didn't even notice it. Well, socialism is sort of the same idea. If you don't notice the money coming off your paycheck, then you're not going to notice that that one person is getting a bunch of money. So that person benefits, and that person feels good about the benefits they just received, but you don't even notice the money coming off. Except that in a socialist system, you have to take so much money off the top that everybody notices, of course. Now, socialism in and of itself, as I say, is tyrannical. It is evil. Socialism violates at least 3 of the 10 commandments. It puts government before God. It says that theft is fine. Theft is no longer a problem so long as you and your friends vote for it. And of course, petty jealousy is something that is necessary. It's good to be jealous. Workers of the world must unite, not because they're necessarily being grinded down by the boot heel of capitalism, but simply because they are jealous of the achievements of others. So much of America's discussion right now about income inequality is not about the suffering poor. So much of it is about the so-called thriving rich, the 1% at the top. It's about tearing down the people who succeed, not about empowering the people who are failing. If we were really talking about helping the poor, we'd be talking about helping the poor, not income inequality. Income inequality itself does nothing. That discussion does nothing to help the poor. What we have to talk about is ways that we can help people who are poor rise out of current circumstance through better decision-making and better opportunity. How about socialism in Europe? So people who are defenders of socialism and say, okay, well, you guys always mention Cuba, you always mention North Korea, you always mention the USSR, you always mention China. But, well, they say China's growing. China's growing because they loosened up their economy, and now it's basically state capitalism. But then they say, well, what about the socialistic countries of Europe? So this is Bernie Sanders' play. Or what about Denmark? What about Switzerland? What about Sweden? Those are not socialist countries. Those are capitalist countries with a high tax system. Okay, that's not the same thing. A socialist country is government owns the means of production. It is about heavy regulation of all parts of the economy. Denmark is actually a better climate to do business than the United States is, according to the Heritage Foundation. Significantly better. There's a lot of foreign investment in Denmark. What makes Denmark a so-called socialist country is the fact that it has 60% tax rates. That's also the reason their economy stagnated so much that they just had to radically cut their tax rates. The same thing is true in Sweden. Sweden gained riches only after embracing capitalism in the mid-19th century. From 1975 to 1993, when they put in place all of these social programs with high levels of spending and high levels of taxation, the country dropped from 4th in the world wealth ranking to 14th. Swedish scholar Nima Sandanji called the country's embrace of redistributionism a colossal failure, which is why they had to liberalize their markets again. Okay, again, back to income inequality for a second. What about this idea that socialism cures the evils of income inequality? First of all, every country on earth has some level of income inequality. In fact, some of the places with the least income inequality are also some of the poorest places on earth. There are places where everybody is destitute. If you go over to certain countries in Africa or Asia, everyone is poor and there's no income inequality. Does that mean that these are great places to live? No, it means these are horrible places to live because nobody has any wealth. America has high levels of income inequality, but our poor are richer than everybody else's poor, which is the thing that matters. In the United States, even the poor people are rich by global standards. According to Pew Research, quote, almost 9 in 10 Americans had a standard of living that was above the global middle income standard. And by the way, the notion that the middle class has been just taking it on the chin in the past few decades in the United States, this is not true. The upper middle class has been picking up all the people who used to be in the middle class. It's not that the middle class devolved into poverty, it's that the middle class split, and most of the middle class became upper middle class. The upper middle class was just 12% of Americans in 1979. As of 2014, 30% of Americans were now upper middle class. And it's also worth noting that all of our schemes to end income inequality have been an enormous fail. We've spent $22 trillion in the war on poverty to no avail. We spend $30,000 per year on poor non-elderly families. And that's paid for by the rich. For all the talk about income inequality and the rich not paying their fair share, the rich are paying pretty much everything. Statistically speaking, people who are high earners in this country are paying virtually all net cost that the federal government incurs. According to the CBO report on distribution of taxes in 2013, the top 1% of households paid 34% of their income to federal taxes. The middle 20% paid just 13%. According to the American Enterprise Institute, the highest income quintile is financing 96% of the entire system of transfer payments to the bottom 60% and funding the functioning of the federal government as well. We actually have the most progressive tax system among all OECD 24 countries. For all the talk about how all the rich people are getting rich in the United States and the poor people are getting poor, we have the most progressive tax system in all of the OECD. And income mobility has not declined either. This is another myth that's pushed out there, that if you're poor, you can never become rich in the United States. This is not true at all. When people talk about the people in the 1% getting richer, they forget. You will be in the 1% one day, and you may not be in the 1% one day. I've been not in the 1%. I've been in the 1%. I assume at some point in the future, I won't be in the 1% by income earning anymore. People move in and out of percentiles of income. It's not the same person. It's not that you were born into the 1% and then you stayed in the 1% your entire life just getting more wealthy. In fact, statistically speaking, if you were in the 1%, there's a pretty good shot that you're going to regress to the mean. For those who were in the top 1% in 1996, and we're not talking about the 1% bracket, we're talking about the actual people in the 1% in 1996, by 2005, their income had decreased on average by 26%. And income mobility works the other way too. According to Thomas Sowell, a University of Michigan study showed most of the working people who were in the bottom 20% of income earners in 1975 were also in the top 40% at some point by 1991. Only 5% of those in the bottom quintile in 1975 were still there in 1991. 29% of them were now in the top quintile. That makes a lot of sense. Right now, there are a lot of people in this room who are in the bottom or middle income quintile because you're in college. You're not making money. In 10 years, you will be making money, presumably. And when that happens, you will have moved up in the world. As you age, you gain more wealth. This is why your grandmother owns a house, but you presumably do not yet. Okay, this will happen to all of you. So don't pay attention to the false statistics that are being put out there about how in America it's impossible to get ahead. That's just not true. Also worth noting, all the talk about the United States sucking up all the wealth of the world, it is because of a capitalist global system that has become more and more prominent, free markets that have become more and more prominent, that literally half the world has been lifted out of abject poverty since 1980. That's because of the force and power of the U.S. free market economy that has been driving all of that growth. The countries, by the way, that are poor in the world, those countries are not the ones that are being hurt by free trade. They're the ones that aren't even participating in free trade. 2/3 of the global poor on planet Earth live in just 5 countries: India, China, Nigeria, Bangladesh, and Congo. According to the Heritage Foundation Index of Economic Freedom, every single one of those countries ranks 120th or below in terms of free markets. This is not a coincidence. Freer markets means more wealth. Freer markets mean more growth.